Yep.
Okay. Hello, class. So here I have a little bit of a board game that I'm gonna play, and in each step, we're gonna learn a lesson. And here's our teacher's gonna learn a lesson. This rock is gonna represent our teacher, and as she goes through and learns the lessons, lesson 1, and then we'll also do a fact, and we'll do lesson 2, a fact, and then 3, and then onward until we learn 11 lessons altogether. And these 11 lessons are paragraphs from my paper that I'm going to read aloud as we go from each step. And then once we get to the end of it, our teacher will be the number one best teacher because of all that she's learned and experienced. So our introduction is from my paper. In this research paper, my topic will focus on the education methods in Mexico and which ones proved most successful and who were the individuals who brought about a positive and successful change. I will explain the effects that a good, detrimental, or lack thereof early development education has on the Mexican culture and the effects that the Mexican culture has on education. I will answer the question, how can we American educators learn from them, and how can we bring about positive changes? This topic is very interesting to me because my field of study is early education, a field of study that always has room for improvement, and the success of each country lies in the early years of development of each and every child. Every education system can learn from each other, so in my research paper, I will tell how we American educators can improve the everyday experiences the children have in our classrooms by learning from the Mexican educators and what they have proven to be successful. Alright, so we're on to lesson 1. Alright, so lesson 1 is the first part of my paper. Strategy can be a document too, but an approach and an attitude in constant revision. And this is in quote. It is considered a guideline from which you can generate changes and adjustments during the process of its operation. This is an essential part of teaching, the flexibility of mind to change and develop according to the needs and challenges that is being experienced by the student. A strategy used by Mexican educators has brought about growth in their students. And that is the practice of reading among others. This is beneficial on many levels and is taught to students in ways that are proven most successful. Alright, now we're going to go on to our fact. And here is a fact about Mexican education, which is not included in my paper, but it's something to just kind of think about and consider. The number of Mexican students has surged to 32 million from 3 million in 1950 as the country's population exploded. So there's a little fact. And then we're on to lesson 2. These ways are successful because the teaching style being used is one of constant... Okay, sorry. That's number 3. These strategic methods originate from the problem. This is learned from an interview the author of the article had with the teacher. The sense of a strategy starts not from their knowledge, but from their adaptation of events. In other words, theoretical knowledge is insufficient for you to face the uncertain and risky demands of the practice. The article goes on to state that for what the teacher cannot mechanically apply the rules, let's see. Let me make sure. The sense of a strategy starts not only from their knowledge, but from their application of events. In other words, theoretical knowledge is insufficient for you to face the uncertain and risky demands of the practice. The article goes on to state that after what the teacher cannot mechanically apply the rules or techniques, but have to creatively and intuitively For what the teacher cannot mechanically apply the rules or techniques, but have to creatively and intuitively address the problem that arises in the particular context of his teaching, which is the origin of the strategies applied by the teacher. This idea is essential to the development of the child, since it addresses the problem and hopes to fix it, after knowing fully what is causing interruptions in the learning process. Okay, now we're on to a fact. And our next fact is most young children attend primary school, but only 62% reach secondary school. At secondary level, about half of students drop out and only a quarter reach higher education, according to a non-governmental organization, Mexicanos Primero, Mexicans First, which is pushing for reform of the system, which was what we'll get to a little later in the essay or research paper. And we're on to our third lesson. Henceforth, the interruptions in the learning process were seen in many areas, and one of which was confronted and solved by a teacher in Mexico by the name Manzillo, who is mentioned in the book, Success and Failures, Reforming the System. This teacher started practice which proved to be beneficial to his students. This is said in the book. According to the observations made, the teacher in front of a group every day goes way beyond technical design of the teaching task, because it is an activity that is an objective situation that forces him to use all resources, personal and technical, to be able to continue leading. Close quote. The teacher makes his point by giving the example. I even brought rag dolls in one day for my students to understand what the correct way to use question marks was like. The ability for this teacher to see the need and then to fulfill it is where the beauty of this type of creative method of teaching brings about. This is certainly a success in the mission for education. Education is meant to be, is very much of a profession which encourages creativity, all to better suit the students' needs. So, on to fact. The next fact. And around 45% of Mexicans finish secondary school, Mexicanos Primero says. By contrast, about 75% of U.S. students graduate from high school on time with a regular diploma, according to the U.S. Department of Education. And again, 45% of Mexicans only finish secondary school. So there are some reforms that need to be done. Okay, and now we're on to lesson 4. Although this type of success is unfortunately new to the Mexican education system, it has not received the proper attention and change it has needed until 2018. In the book, Reforming the System, Success and Failures. In this book, the author David Scott explains the challenges that the Mexican education has endured, which stunts its growth. The current crisis in Mexican education is not the failure to put into effect a new set of curricular, pedagogic, and evolution reforms, but also to the continued myopia to learn from the past. The author goes on to state that the impediment to educational change is not the why, the what, but the how. So, in other words, the crisis to be found by asking the question of how did this happen? How did the problems in the education system not get recognized? How were they eluded? Well, it stems from the continued myopia as well as other factors, which is a myopia being a misunderstanding and a lack of remembering and learning from the past mistakes. Okay, on to fact. Another fact we have. Mexicans read less than 3 books a year on average, a product of low education levels and poverty, studies show. Scott continues his reasoning by stating, locating the underlying reasons for these continuing failures requires a knowledge of stakeholders and their relationship to the social balance of power. This is to say, those who have influenced the way the system was run didn't know how it was run. Scott goes on to say, in particular, idiosyncratic and non-entrepreneurial Mexican middle class is largely both a product and the defender of the Mexican state configuration, and is very different from that of European and Anglo-Saxon countries. However, this aspect has never been raised by academics and never enters the collective mind of various generations of the so-called reformers. Scott continues, the reformers tend to concentrate on the relatively safe areas of the why and the what of education, because of this, the real influences of education escapes them, as do the true remedies and solutions that could solve them. One second. Okay. As is described by Scott, this is more deeply and less considered is the idea that it requires an understanding of the social forces that constitute and maintain particular configurations of educational institutions, and their practices of a coherent strategy for reform is to be developed. So, in summary, Mexico was influenced by reformers who didn't fully understand where the problems originated from. This is because of a lack of knowledge in the culture which influenced the teachers, students, and all those involved. This idea is stated by Scott. The field has been occupied by instrumental and pragmatic observers who attempt to construct systems and practices without any real understanding of and their reference to the structures of those societies. So reformers try to come through and change, but they more like created more problems because they didn't understand where truly the problems originated from. Right. So, on to fact. And we got Mexico spends about 5% of gross domestic product on education, a respectable level compared to other major economics. But corruption means the money does not translate into real gains in the equality of education, experts say. And this is where the problems lie. And now we're on lesson 6. From this ignorance of the source of the problem lies the answer. That is the importance of grasping the effects culture has on the education system. As Scott puts it in another way, it is important to point out that it must be contextualized by the understanding of the nature of the Mexican society that allows the generation of programs and institutions, in some cases, or hinders and makes it impossible in others. That is, the social purpose and function of the education system must be examined. The examination of the social purpose of education leads us to a very important question. How does the culture and society affect the education system, and more precisely, the classroom? Okay, fact. Okay. Mexican students perform badly in the education tests run by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development that measures standards in 65 industrialized countries. In the last study, published in December, Mexican 15-year-olds came 46th in reading, 49th in mathematics, and 51st in science. All right. On to lesson 9. The education system is influenced by the culture of each student.